Buenas tardes, good afternoon. This is Dr. Eliud Flores. I'm a professor at the College of Communication and Information here at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. Today, we have a couple of distinguished guests who are going to talk us about the agenda to enable technology research and powerful capabilities doing blockchain, advanced hyper-performance computing, and AI on those platforms, and with the interesting caveat that it can be done in a data center right here in Puerto Rico. So our main speaker today is going to be Ms. Gail Towers Nolan. She's the CECD or CEO of Puerto Rico 5G Zone and Blockchain Ignition Lab, which is a non-profit zero trust architecture secure research laboratory system focused on applied research regarding telecommunications space technologies. She was previously the Chief Strategy Officer at Invest Puerto Rico, managing asset identification and strategic business development based on those aggregated assets. In 2023, this year, she was appointed by Governor Pedro Pierluisi to serve as the chairperson of the Infrastructure Subcommittee of the Council for Aerospace and Aeronautics Industry in Puerto Rico, and she was also appointed that this same year to be the president of the technology chapter of the Puerto Rico Manufacturers Association. Gail is a certified economic developer through the International Economic Development Council, and she has won national recognition awards for innovative development products. Okay, and later we're also going to hear from Geraldo Acevedo from the Hub, and he'll be introducing himself because I didn't get his bio beforehand, but he will introduce himself. Actually, why don't you go ahead, Geraldo, and tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started with the content of this session.
Hey, good afternoon to you all. And my name is Geraldo Acevedo. I work for Hub Advanced Networks, and we own Hub 787, which is the only Tier 3 certified data center in Puerto Rico. And I've been in the industry for 30 years. And in Hub, I've been like for 10. And if you want to talk about submarine cables and things like that, you can give me a call. I'm gonna leave my contact information in the chat. You can contact me anytime, even in weekends and nights. I'll always pick up the phone, or usually pick up the phone.
People who are in infrastructure, IT infrastructure, are 724 people. So that's for certain. And just as a quick reminder of the context of this session for the people who are joining us for the first time, what you are being part of is a rather innovative webinar series that I launched this term as part of an AI special topics course that I'm teaching at the graduate level. And I have taking advantage of many of my friends in the industry all over the world to join us and become speakers for my class. And I figured that it was going to be terrible of me to limit the exposure to these incredible speakers to just my small graduate level class. So that's why I decided that half of the classes will be open to the world through this webinar series. This is our third, and they have been incredibly well received. And actually, yeah, or third or fourth, I certainly forget. And I believe that we are making an important contribution from the university to the community by opening these webinars. And I hope that you guys join us for the rest of this series, in which we are going to be dealing with a number of elements related to artificial intelligence in health and in customer service and personal productivity, and other topics from people from all over the world who are joining us. If you would like to watch the previous sessions, you can look them up at the SEA. And I'm going to write down, even though you're here, you probably know where that is. And in the chat there, you have the cea.uprrp.edu. That's where you can register for the next webinars that we are going to be hosting here through December. Well, without further ado, now I want to ask Gail Towers, Nolan, to take the floor and illuminate us about PRG5 Zone. Welcome, Gail.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Professor Flores. I'm really honored to be here to talk to you. And I just want to frame it because I know that your sessions together are very focused on AI and the technology development for AI. And I really want to take a step back and talk a little bit about the applications and strategies around AI, and specifically strategies that we're developing in Puerto Rico for AI applications. And so it's a different lens because we're looking at it from the lens of economic development. Although we look at it from a lens of economic development by observing how AI is impactful for business and industry, and how it's how that paradigm has been shifted a little with the creation of AI, and particularly ChatGPT as it's changing a little bit of the design. And this is our opening slide. The Puerto Rico 5G zone is, as Professor Flores said, is a research platform. It's actually a system of labs. We're going to be opening our second lab shortly at UPR Mayaguez. And the first lab is at Hub 787, which is a cable landing station data center that Geraldo will talk about during his slides. So to give just a little bit of background, again, I came to Puerto Rico about 5 years ago after a career in economic development, and specifically disaster recovery and global competitiveness. Those things sound a little disparate, but they're really not, because when you have disasters, you get significant funding. And so how do you leverage that, not to just get back to the place you were before, which sometimes was vulnerable, but to actually get to a better place? And so we did a lot of that work historically by utilizing what's called tech-led economic development. And so it's making sure that your technology is advanced to be more resilient in the future. And so we put together this particular strategy over a 3-year period of time with partners both from the island and then partners that we have off the island from a technology perspective. And so I'm going to run through, kind of give you the overview of what the strategy is, and pause in the middle for Geraldo to tell you a little bit more about Hub Advanced Networks and their structure on the island, and then to talk about some of the AI tools that we plan on using. And then I'm really hoping we could have some robust conversation afterwards from your perspective as students, and quite frankly, as the future of technology development on the island of Puerto Rico, and where you see opportunities and where you have questions. So the first slide is for
Gail, excuse me a second. If you don't mind, you see on the top left where it says home, that label, double click on it to see if we can hide that there.
Perfect. Perfect. It's great to have an expert in the technology. So the most recent proposal that we put together that is currently pending is from the Economic Development Administration of the Federal Department of Commerce. And the program is called the Regional Tech Innovation Hubs. And their challenge was for partners across the country to identify differentiating capabilities that different regions had that could serve as a national hub for a specific type of technology research and development. And so the first step was putting together consortium partners that really covered the entirety of an ecosystem. And so for our proposal, this is our map of the consortium. And I will say this is not an exhaustive map, but it just gives you an idea of the pillars. So the way that we identified our structure was we have core partner organizations that we work with, and then within each of those there's members and participants who engage. And so we'll do kind of a top up and a bottom up and a top down approach to how we engage these partners. And I've identified the partners and their particular roles. So if they're government, if they're industry firms, if they're institutions of higher learning. So it just provides a quick guideline for how we put together impactful ecosystems. This slide is kind of the why Puerto Rico, because remembering that this particular grant solicitation wanted us to identify what's unique about Puerto Rico and why would we be the only place in the country that would be logical for this type of development. And one of the things that I talk about a lot, and you look under unique network, is that our lab at Hub 787 is the only place on US soil where we have a publicly owned research platform on top of the convergence of foreign, domestic, terrestrial, non-terrestrial, cooperative and non-cooperative networks. And the reason that is so important is whenever you have areas of convergence, whether it's fiber optics to radio frequency or satellite communications, or if it's a domestic carrier like T-Mobile and a foreign carrier like Claro, there's intersection points, and the cybersecurity and the development around those is really important. And so being the only place in the US where you can do that kind of research and development in that environment at the convergence is really an important thing that Puerto Rico can bring both to national security as a whole to the rest of the US, but also from an international basis, because a lot of times partners in other countries, and I will say I just did a tour of businesses with other leaders from Puerto Rico in Spain, and many of the companies say they would love to engage in the US market, but their challenge is the cybersecurity around that convergence, that they don't, their product wasn't developed under the regulatory environment required in the US, and it would take a lot for them to translate. And so in our network, you can actually create in something called a mudroom, you can create solutions that's a filter, so to speak, that either can have the appropriate firewall from a safety perspective or the access points necessary to make the connection seamless. And so the rest of these points are things that you can look at later. For our hub, we looked specifically at, again, communication-based technology research as our hub concept, but we recognize that, so that's the large gray circle. We recognize that there are 4 areas of strength in Puerto Rico that we think could be areas of initial focus, although we think communication-based technology research is relevant to every industry. We looked at these 4, so bioscience, climate research, aerospace, and logistics.
I'm surprised you didn't include IT development. We have several powerhouses, particularly in the area of programming, AI, business process automation. Companies have been sold internationally, even developing their own ERPs.
Yes.
I would love for you to add that to your Venn diagram.
And so actually that is, we encompass that within communication technologies. So anything that runs on a technology that enhances communication through data is what we're calling communication-based technologies. So that's the big gray circle in this, is that external piece. Does that make sense?
Of course, go ahead.
Great. Okay. And so then about the 5G zone. So we've got a basic mission, and that is to make technology tools, advanced technology tools, accessible to anybody. So traditionally, things like high performance computing would be available to researchers in academic institutions, but it wasn't really available to innovators who wanted to go in and create new products or test and validate new products. So we want to bring some of these very cutting edge tools to people in Puerto Rico at a very affordable cost. And quite frankly, it's to people, it's to nonprofits, and it's to industry that we make these tools available at a very reasonable annual membership fee. And again, the membership fee isn't so we profit, it is just so that we can keep our doors open. And so basically we leverage around several different ideas. So the first is ideas. We mystify the concepts of different technologies so that new ideas and solutions can flourish. Because for an example, high performance computing, if you have basic, it sounds very sophisticated, but if you have basic coding skills, you can learn to utilize high performance computing and run problems and equations through that at and I believe it's 10,000 times the speed of traditional computing. And so it just opens up new opportunities to accelerate the research and development that you're basing your information on, or your tool development or innovation on. We provide, as I said, the latest tools, data. We manage data effectively for optimized applications. So that data management is, as I said, through high performance computing. And after Geraldo talks about the assets at Hub 787, we can talk about some of the additional things that the PR5G zone brings into that co-located lab, so that we have the assets of both the Puerto Rico 5G zone and Hub advanced networks to offer to our clients and members. And then finally, vision. So we're tracking technology trends and future growth opportunities for Puerto Rico businesses so that we know how to shift and adjust our strategy based on what the latest information is. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of Moore's Law. Came out a while ago. George Moore was the individual who came up with that, and his prediction was that chips would diminish in size and increase in capacity, and it would double. Professor Flores, you're going to have to help me with this. I believe it was going to double on a yearly basis. But I think now we're in like a daily basis.
Yeah, that was
scenario.
I think it was IBM or something that came up with that formula that every year was going to double in capacity. But now
Right.
we are growing exponentially in terms of the computing capacity. It can hardly be measured now, particularly now with NVIDIA creating AI specialized chips that actually apply language models, advanced language models, just to provide hyperspeed on that. So now everything is more like processes as opposed to processors.
Right.
And it's a completely different scheme. And in our previous lecture, we had the people from Microsoft showing us all the different components of that AI computing monster, if you will. And each little gadget that you add adds additional power, and you don't even see which processors they're using. You get the
Right.
service. So it's a different way of computing nowadays.
Well, and I can speak to that because when I first started studying on computers in my high school, we actually have what was called a computer room, and it wasn't a room with a bunch of laptops where people went to use their computers. It was literally the room that held our computer, and we were running things with cards. So it has advanced exponentially, and again, that's just our goal, is to apply that the more technologies and the more solutions that are created, the more challenging it becomes for business to be able to navigate that. And so that's part of where we want to demystify, is to be kind of a navigational source for those companies that are just trying to keep up with all the new products, innovations, and services. The PR5G zone is basically, it's a lab as a service. And so we offer zero trust data, secure labs. We have the most sophisticated data tools in the Caribbean, thanks to our partnership with Hub Advanced Systems. We've negotiated with Texas A&M, and through submarine cable, low latency submarine cable access into Hub 787, we can provide our partners with high performance computing access at Texas A&M. And then there's an IoT validation platform that's been created at Hub Advanced Systems that our partners can go in, and with that they can look at software, hardware, and firmware, and look at the embedded integrated technologies and compatibility of those different parts and pieces, and identify whether in this very controlled, secure environment, whether the product that they're designing is compatible with, for example, a market partner. And I'll use as an example here, Boeing, for example, really utilizes a lot of all three of those pillars, hardware, software, and firmware, in their product development. And they have their own validation lab to look at those embedded integrated systems and how they work together. But if you're creating a new product and you want to approach Boeing about them becoming part of their supply chain, you have to know that your part is compatible with the other components that they're using. And so this is a place where you can test that. Are there any questions on that?
Actually, I do have a question about that because it may be confusing for some of us, including myself, because the name is PR5G zone. One immediately gets drawn to think of 5G as advanced cellular technology. So my question for you is, in addition to whatever you do with the HPCF computing capabilities in Mayagüez at the hub and Texas NIM, Aggies are almost as good as we Longhorns at UT Austin. I'm an alumni from UT Austin. But do you have access to any kind of actual 5G cellular network? Because that might be particularly important for people doing IoT research.
Yes. So both at our primary hub, and we'll have actually 2 small cells at our lab at UPR Mayagüez. One will be the hub small cell, and one will be, which is the wholesale network, and one will be through Liberty.
Okay,
and we are agnostic to provider, by the way. So
okay, and we have a whole bunch of people who
provider.
are not technical. So if you don't mind my just explaining this a little bit. One thing is actual computing, right? You actually do the computing on servers, which can be on a data center, or they can be on a private cloud, or they can be on a public cloud. And public, that doesn't mean that anyone can just get there. It means that you pay for your own space there, like Microsoft Azure or like AWS, right? Amazon Web Services.
Correct. But so we have our own rack at hub.
Right, and you have your own racks there. But the thing is that with IoT, Internet of Things, you actually depend on collecting thousands of data points from a bunch of devices. Some of those devices might be your refrigerator connected to your Wi-Fi network, and that will just go there through whatever ISP you're using. But when you are doing IoT from the perspective of monitoring, say, a truck fleet, where are my gasoline trucks moving around? Is anyone trying to steal the diesel that people need in the hospitals after a hurricane? Assuming that the cell towers survive, the IoT transmitter at that truck can actually send data to the cell towers using a 5G low data consumption. It has a special name. Sorry, low band, whatever, LOB 5G. And that means that it's not like a phone number. It's actually just like a burst of data that doesn't consume that much information. And with that information, actually the gas station, when people are banging at the glass there, hey, the truck is on its way, it's going to be here in 42 minutes, because the system will be able to calculate that kind of stuff. But for that, you need to interface your computing with your cellular network, which would actually give you the positioning which is much less expensive than trying to do that with satellite technology, because satellites are 22,300 miles away on the sky, and it's very difficult to capture those signals from that far away. So I just wanted to clarify that for you guys, that one thing is actual communications and telecommunications and access points and transmission points for the information, and then data processing and computing is done at the data center, which can be local, private cloud, or on the public cloud. Hopefully that simplified instead of confusing you more.
Thank you. Thank you for jumping in. And actually, we're going to talk about, we are getting a new laser, space to ground laser communication network on the island. And so that's, to your point, that's going to kind of create redundancy with the ground fiber. So now I want to hand it over to Geraldo, and he's given you a little bit of his background, and he can talk through these next several slides about Hub Advanced Networks. And when we first came to the island, and again, if I could just back up for a second, when I came to the island and worked at Invest Puerto Rico, I helped develop for them some of their industry targets for companies that they would want to attract to the island of Puerto Rico, and really looking at it from a value chain perspective. So kind of how are all these companies related, and how do we make sure that we have the right partner companies for them on the island? And as I was doing that, and the companies we were targeting had really heavy need for what we would call critical intelligent infrastructure. And so we needed to understand and market better, and then actually design better the critical intelligent infrastructure to serve these companies. And so this is when I found Hub 787 and Hub Advanced Networks, and we started to work on the partnership. And I left Invest Puerto Rico and started working for the PR5G zone, because I recognized how important it was to make sure that companies would have this kind of infrastructure, and that it was part of the messaging for how we attract them to the island. So with that as a little bit of context, Geraldo, do you want to talk about Hub and about all the impressive assets there?
Okay. Good evening to you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about Hub Advanced Networks, and I have to say, I have to apologize to Gail, because I need to do some changes to that map. I will explain in this presentation very quickly. Hub Advanced Networks has an extensive network of submarine fiber optic cables that connect to the east of the United States. That means that we are the only company that have.
Geraldo, your sound is suddenly being muffled, and sometimes it's good, and so suddenly it gets muffled. Okay, so patch it up.
Let me try again. We're the only data center in Puerto Rico. They have different submarine cables to the east coast of the United States, and also to different cables that goes into Dominican Republic, Virgin Islands, Dutch Virgin Islands, and Curacao in South America. That's it. And when we talk about AI, internet, and stuff like that, the main thing is the eastern seaboard of the U.S. coast. That means that we connect with, again, 5 cables, 3 in Florida, 1 to Virginia, and 1 to New York. We go straight in different routes into this moment. We are the only building certified for AWS outpost in Puerto Rico. We also have connectivity to the Azure cloud for couple of customers, And we also own an MPLS fiber network inside Puerto Rico. We have two MPLS networks, one international that goes to the U.S. mainland, and another one which is inside Puerto Rico. Let's go to the other slide, if there is another slide. Let me look at it. Okay, this is the basically the pillars of services that we offer. We are a wholesale optical service provider. That means that I can provide services to other carriers, not to commercial or to residential customers on what it is fiber. Okay, we have an international backbone and data center. We do special facilities. I'm going to explain you what special facilities means. You remember Hurricane Maria back in 2017. After that, we got a contract with T-Mobile to develop their infrastructure for 5G, and Puerto Rico was the first jurisdiction in Latin America to have 5G. Always remember that. We way ahead of the pack from Latin America. Way ahead of the pack, you cannot imagine. By the way, Colombia is going to do it next year. We did it in 2018. So that's, you know, a special purpose real estate. That means we have some properties that we can rent for special purposes, like telecommunications company or research and development companies and things like that. And emerging technologies. What we mean by emerging technologies? What we mean is we have an IoT platform, okay, which is functioning. We use it in the building, and we have customers, okay, that benefit from that solutions. We can do simple things that you may know, like gathering information on temperature and doors open, doors closed, simple things. But we can go to more complicated things, like monitoring the acidity of a raw milk tank. I mean, of a tank with raw milk on it. So whatever you can think of, we might be able to monitor, okay? And the main thing is getting the data. We collect the data and give it to you, okay? And you can do whatever you need with that data. And that's very important. Okay, especially if you have local or federal government regulations, IoT is the platform. That's simple as that. You have another you have another screen or no? Okay. In addition to the physical network, they also offer advanced service capabilities. As a wholesale network, they provide an interface within other global retail networks, and they provide internet to the UPR system and have a low latency HPC connection. One of the things that I want to stress here is that Hub 787, by being the only Tier 3 certified or the only Tier certified building in the island, milestone. That takes a lot of audits and some time to get that certification. And the building is ready for whatever you can imagine. Okay, on what when we talk about technology, we are ready. By the way, we are registered with the Puerto Rico Gaming Commission. So one of the industries is going to be booming is going to be the gaming industry. And we're ready for that, and we already have a customer in our premises with a solution for AWS Outpost. Then the technical capabilities of the Hub 77. In the building, we have the asset control, the CCTV, secure suites, 16,300 square feet for data center services. We got 3 floors for data center, okay? The third floor, the last floor, is data center. The second floor is half of it is ours. The other half is for the federal government. And in the first floor, we already have a provider there. 1/4 of the first floor is already rented. Okay, on power, as you know, Puerto Rico have only one power provider. So we have a substation, we have an east-west feed, and then we have two big generators. And inside the hub, we got a flywheel. We got an infrastructure in case that the power goes off. You're not going to feel it inside hub 787, and all the power is filtered, so you don't feel the luma fluctuations. You don't have to worry about that when you are in hub 787. By the way, we have all the utilities of Puerto Rico inside hub 787, and the federal government, who is the one who controls the diesel supply when we have another hurricane. So you can rest assured when you have your service of 787 on the environmental control. We have 7 in the data center floor. We got 7 FM200 fire suppressors. We have the air cooling system. We got the building management system, which control the humidity and the temperature. And we're a liquid building. We collect water from rain, and we process it for the utilities. For the last but not least, the connectivity. We connect you to the global IP network. We have a traffic exchange point, and we have redundant fiber entries. We have fiber that comes from the sea and also that comes from the land. And we work with all providers. We are agnostic. But I want to mention this: the big difference between Hub 77 and other buildings that we receive the cable straight from the sea. And we spent 42 days in January Maria. We never went down because we get the internet straight from the mainland. So we don't get it at the other side of the city. But that's a big difference. You have another slide? No. Yeah.
Gail, you're on mute. There.
Now, and you can see my slide now with the map of Puerto Rico and the various dots.
Right.
Okay, so thank you, Geraldo. And now that, and I know next week that you're going to have a field trip to Hub 787 to see how impressive that was.
That is for my students. Sorry, not for the rest of the group, but my students are going with me to have a tour. I've been there before, so I know they're in for a treat because it looks almost like one of those James Bond installations, right? It's really interesting.
It really is. Yes, yes. Well, I'm excited for you. And if anyone who isn't part of your class wants to do a tour, please reach out. We can schedule that at some time in the future. So
I just want to ask Geraldo one thing before you continue, Gail. Why is it important to have a tier 3 data center in Puerto Rico?
Okay. As I mentioned before, getting a tier certification from the Optime Institute, which is an international institution that evaluates data centers. It takes a lot of work, also takes a lot of money, and to get it right from the first time, you need to design the data center from the beginning as a data center, not getting a building and then modify it. And the reason it's so important is that Hub 787 is a confirmed technology hub. And you guys may know, Puerto Rico will become the center of blockchain transaction in the Caribbean, will be the center of the gaming industry in the Caribbean. Okay. And
so
like
basically, when you're a tier 3, I just want people to understand the economic development implications of having that certification.
Yeah.
That means that you can attract to Puerto Rico to be hosted locally, high security, high volume transactional platforms that, unless they have that kind of data center, certified data center available, they would not come here. They will have to stay in Miami
Yeah,
or go to Brazil,
yeah,
and then we have all the latency and we would not attract that business to the country. Am I correct there?
yes, that is correct.
So that's what I wanted to clarify for people, because I don't want people to think that we are just propeller heads here, getting excited about bits and bytes,
Yeah,
and all of this has economic development implications. It also has implications for the level of research. You can do the kind of data aggregation, you can do the latency and the reliability of your observations when you're doing real time. If you are like a hurricane chaser or whatever, you have all these IoT sensors around the island. I mean, Maria came right by my house. She didn't ask me for coffee, but she went right over my head, Cat 4, here in Gurao. And I wish I had, well, if I had a weather station, it probably would have been blasted off the ceiling. But the roof, right? But it's important that you measure this stuff, because a lot of scientists after the hurricane said we really have very limited measurements of what happened in Puerto Rico because we didn't have the means to collect it.
Yeah.
And by having this level of data center, you have one part of the equation. Now the rest has to do with what Gail is showing here in terms of how we can bring additional observation sites and connected sites that can get all that atmospheric, environmental, traffic, whatever layer you want to add to the platform, so that you can make sense of it in the high level data center.
That
Let
is
me make
exactly right.
one last comment. That's one quick comment. You know, I want to tell you what one of the things that make Hub 787 very unique, and it is that it's a platform to get better job opportunities in Puerto Rico. Why? Because when we get military contractors, they get amazed that we have a building like this in Puerto Rico. And because I deal with them every now and then, and they all get amazed. And I even have multinationals from Italy and other places. I have the brother of the president of Dominican Republic in Hub 787. Also, other persons from different countries, and they all get amazed about the building. So that attracts investment. Okay, and people stop looking at Puerto Rico from abroad like, oh, that's for beaches only. No, no, there is technology, there is people, there is prepare. So that's what means.
Gracias,
Thank you.
Geraldo.
And
All right, Gail, you can keep going.
sure. And so to your point, both of your points, when I saw Hub 787 and recognized what the capabilities were, I recognized that that was the core piece for economic development for the island if we were looking to the future. And so because technology is going, as we said before, it's growing exponentially. It's only going to continue down that pathway. And so how do we make it available to everybody on the island? Because as much as Hub 787 is a great asset, there's a lot of locations around the island that, and quite frankly, it's for as small as the island is, it's not really easy to travel from San Juan to places around the island. So we envisioned the idea of opening up various portals that were on top of the network map, so to speak, the fiber optic network that Hub Advanced Systems owns, and then have various portals that could plug into the capabilities of Hub 787, but provide them remotely. So within, our goal was to try and be within 15 minutes of any location on the island of Puerto Rico. What we envision is that each of those labs could have a different area of sector focus. So for example, in the northwest of the island, where there's a strong industry cluster around aerospace, they could work collectively on challenges around, and I'm just using this as an example. So many may know that when 5G last January was scheduled to be turned on all over the country in a lot of areas that happen to be adjacent to airports, the FAA had to come out and restrict, I believe it was 44 airports, from specific types of planes, because the altimeters in those planes, which is how the plane knows how high or low to the ground it is, were designed prior to 5G. They didn't have appropriate filters to filter out the interference from 5G towers. So airports that had towers nearby were going to have to not allow certain planes until they could get upgraded. So it was an industry-wide challenge that by partnering and having collaborations around researchers and industry specialists, you can get to the solution faster, quicker, and better. Now, the types of filters designed for that would potentially be useful in other industries. So what we envision is each one of these dots would have collaborations around specific industry needs, but then collectively they would share information back and forth, because, and I'll use again as an example, in the medical device sector, even though medical device manufacturing and research and development is different, and has some different challenges than the aerospace industry, the technologies are somewhat similar. And so there could be solutions in one of those that fixes a problem in the other. So we really want to create what we would call cross-disciplinary interaction between the various nodes of our on-island network. So our master strategy with all of our partners was the idea that we would use these connected labs, and the labs having all of the tools and capabilities that we've outlined, kind of briefly here, because it's much more dynamic than we're able to tell in one meeting. And then through our organization, we have what we call the REACH, the Research Empowered Advanced Communication Hub structure, which is that map that I showed you early on. So it's how do we bring together all the collaborators and help them to pollinate ideas across these multidisciplinary research focus areas. And then we want to enable our labs with specific AI tools. And I'll show you what some of those tools are. And we're not bound only to these tools, but these are the ones initially that we've identified. And what we want to do is, because decision-making is dependent on data, and using data to create, I like to use the quote that, data is a collection of facts, and information is when you put those facts together to create a story. And so AI helps you translate your data into information more rapidly, because you can mine your data in very creative and interesting ways using AI, based on the algorithms you used in order to sort the data. And then our fourth pillar is we want to engage industry in Puerto Rico. And another unique differentiator in Puerto Rico is that for a small, compact region, there is incredible diversity in the ecosystem for industry. And so the industry partners for the Puerto Rico Manufacturers Association really represent a microcosm of industry partners in the US as a whole. So we can engage industry in Puerto Rico and ask them what their challenges are, and then identify through that the types of solutions that they need, circulate those challenges to innovators and researchers so that they can come up with customized solutions, and then use those same industry partners to test and validate and make sure if those products solve their challenge or not. And in the case where they don't solve it, then we can go back to the labs and the research partnerships and collaborations of REACH and come up with new solutions. So again, the labs, and this kind of shows where we would brainstorm with industry partners and have them tell us in their words, and going back to the idea of the exponential growth of technologies. Technology is growing so rapidly, and the different products and solution options is growing so rapidly that it's hard for industry and business to keep track of what those new innovations and new products are. And so again, we're trying to help make it more understandable. And we're saying that it's a language issue. And I'm not talking Spanish and English. I'm saying the language that industry speaks versus the language that technologists speak. And so how do we translate so that both sides feel really confident? Number one, on the business side, that they feel confident that the solutions that they choose truly are the most efficient, effective way to solve their challenges of their particular business operations. And on the innovator side and on the technology side, are they really understanding what the complexity of those challenges are so that they can design products that solve all of their challenges, as opposed to having to kind of cobble together different solutions in what sometimes I call like a Frankenstein solution, where you're putting together parts and pieces of other solutions. And so this is what's going to happen. And I see this as maybe the biggest thing with ChatGPT is that it makes coding and product development so much easier to do. And so where in the past, innovators would come up with products that kind of reached the lowest common denominator of challenges for companies, and the companies would adopt that across various sectors. What I see the evolutions of AI allowing us to do is that companies can instead say, here are my challenges, now create a solution that solves that, so that I don't have to go and get hundreds of different products. I just need to be able to have my solutions met in a very customized way. So I don't know, Elliot, if you have any thoughts on that particular issue, because I'd love to hear your philosophical concept on that paradigm shift.
I think it is a paradigm shift, because the problem is that, just to put it in context, Microsoft has invested over $12 billion in ChatGPT. The first $2 billion were invested just in computing infrastructure, just building on Azure the specialized servers capable of doing the kind of high performance computing required for AI. That's fine and dandy for companies like ChatGPT and Microsoft that have billions upon billions to invest. But what happens if an academic professor or if an entrepreneur wants to get into that business? It's very difficult. Right now, I have my own AI project that I'm trying to develop, and my very lowly estimate for a kind of a simple, intelligent chatbot is going to cost over $2,000 a month, just in the cloud subscription. So having access to something like what you're providing would allow researchers who also want to do this for pure science to get in at a low barrier of entry by having access to your computing prowess there. Now, let me ask you a question about that assumption that I'm making, because in knowing how Microsoft does it, I don't know much about AWS. I know that they do have a number of specialized cloud services for specific areas like speech recognition, image recognition, transactional areas of AI and whatever. I don't know if you guys have your own agreements, either with Microsoft or AWS or IBM. These are all companies that are developing their own specialized agents, so that researchers can have access to that at a lower cost, or if you have access to other AI models that can be placed into your systems so that they can be trained by the researchers in doing what they need to do.
So yes and no. So right now we rely on the relationships and the agreements that Hub has in place. However, we want to customize to the people that use our platform, which is why we're very collaborative, and even how we've developed our strategy over the last couple of years. And so that what you just asked is the perfect segue, because what I'll explain is the process we went through to evaluate different industry focus areas and the types of technologies that those industries would need to remain competitive. And that's how we will dictate, as we write grants and develop the infrastructure, what kinds of equipments or capabilities are in it. So we want to be led by exactly what you're talking about. What is the need? Because we really don't want to put in things that won't be utilized, that have a lot of
Sure.
bells and whistles but aren't really effective. So we commissioned in last spring semester with University of Michigan to work with their multidisciplinary action program, which works with, like your program here, works with graduate students. These are returning professionals going for MBAs. And when I say returning professionals, I'll give an example. One of the gentlemen who worked on our project was the chief chip designer for General Motors. He had a bachelor's in engineering and master's in engineering, and was coming back to get a master's in business, just so that he would understand, again, how to design and engineer so that it aligned to the business side of the equation. He recognized that those two things, you need to understand them better. So in this study, we had 6 individuals, all with very high level credentials, as I just mentioned. And their task was to look at the island of Puerto Rico, and based on projected growth, it's called CAGR, projected growth rates for various industries, to identify areas of specific high growth potential in Puerto Rico, and then do a comparative analysis against companies in the US and companies internationally, or regions in domestically and internationally, and identify what kind of enabling technologies each of those industry needs to remain competitive on a current basis. So we'll use aerospace on this slide as the example. So currently, aerospace, you need to have 3D printing, additive manufacturing, prototyping, digital management, and automation. And then we looked at, so that's current. Then we looked at next, and then we looked at future. And so next for aerospace will be drone applications, data analytics, cybersecurity, AI, and blockchain. And not to say that those aren't areas that they're not utilizing already, but they're emerging areas. And so, the development and the applications within each of those technologies is important, but you need to have those kinds of capabilities available to innovators. And then future is going to be quantum computing, augmented reality, virtual reality, swarm robots, and soft robotics. And so again, you don't need to memorize all of those different elements, but just to understand the granularity with which we looked at why we should design these centers the way we design them. And always we were looking at it from the perspective of economic development on the island of Puerto Rico. So what industries should we focus on, and what technologies do those industries need to be able to be successful? And then how do we enhance the island by creating awareness around those technologies, and quite frankly, training programs for those technologies?
I assume that basically you are creating a server bank, and then you're just creating virtual machines for people as they need them, right?
Correct.
Which is actually great for those of you listening to us who are researchers. You know that the death of us is actually waiting for the procurement processes on the island, particularly in universities, which are slower than a snail in getting their things, their ducks in a row to buy anything. So when you basically sign up for a subscription, you can get your server up and running in a matter of minutes as opposed to weeks or months to procure buying a server. So that's important. Gail, one question that sometimes comes up, particularly with academic researchers, their concern is that they may get funding for, say, a year or two. What happens to their data if at the end of those 2 years, they cannot secure another grant to keep it running on these servers? How can they at least download it in a format that they can keep it and then load it on a physical server or some other alternative once they get out of the grant? How will you handle that?
Yes, and so that again, you're exactly right that the data belongs to the individuals, and I will say that's a challenge we haven't necessarily solved yet. And I will use the example. This is actually one of the premises that we used in our EDA Tech Hub proposal. Is those of you, I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that the Arecibo Observatory for 50 years was collecting data, and that researchers would come down and utilize that data in validating their research or advancing their research. When the Arecibo Observatory transferred from NSF's Office of Research, their research directorate, into their educational directorate, all of that data, and it's 2 petabytes of data, was transferred off the island to the Texas Advanced Computing Center, because they had from an NSF perspective, they had the capacity to manage that data. But that means researchers, even Puerto Rican researchers who collected all of that data, now will have to go and pay to access that data at the Texas Advanced Computing Center. So part of our strategy, and we'll get to that farther on, is to actually build out the capabilities on the island so that we have those resources here for exactly the purposes that you're talking about, to be able to sponsor data and have the capability. And I will say the data center at Hub 787, when you go and tour, you'll see tremendous growth capabilities within that facility. There's a lot of room still for growth there. But we also are looking at potentiality of putting in high performance computing in that building, because the significant part of the cost of high performance computing is maintaining the environment for the equipment, which Hub already has that and they're managing that on a daily, 24/7 basis. And so the limitation right now is power. For Hub 787, they have, I think, about 2 megawatts available of power, so we could put in initial high performance computing then, and then accelerate it with a second facility that would have what you're talking about.
Let me ask you a nerdy question. Is high performance computing being achieved now mostly through clustering many small servers, or are we still going the old-fashioned way with big mainframe type single units with many processors?
So the latter is the more prominent, and in fact, because things like to be honest, I'll be really transparent. The reason why we have the agreement with Texas A&M is because they have a supercomputing center, but then the Texas Advanced Computing Center was built in Austin, kind of in their backyard, and you don't really need 2. And so Texas A&M, their focus with their supercomputing center is public safety. And so after the hurricane, that's where we negotiated with them, because they are doing this as a gift for us, to provide us access to their high performance computing center.
And just so the audience knows, because we are talking about many different technologies here and it's all highly complex, but when you are dealing with clusters or with servers and you create virtual machines, you basically have like your own virtual server on the cloud and or in a private cloud, whatever, on the data center. But when you're doing with a mainframe of sorts, a supercomputer, they're not exactly the same, but they're basically a beast. It's a beast of a computer. There, you don't actually get like virtual machine. What you do is that you get time. You get at least You get 2 hours of time, 3 hours of time, and then you bring your data sets and you crunch them however, which way you want, and then you take all that output, which is all electronic, and you store it later. But you need to take those 2 hours and take advantage of them to the utmost, because then another nerd comes in and they take another 2 hours and crunch numbers for the next
Right.
photo in 2 hours. Okay.
And honestly, it's one of the reasons that was one of the gaps we uncovered in Puerto Rico, and why we started this initiative is that researchers, there's two places to do high performance computing analyses in Puerto Rico, on the Rio Piedras campus and at UPR Mayaguez, but it's based on seniority of the professor running the experiments. And to your point, a lower seniority professor may go in and have somebody bump them when they haven't even crunched all their data. So then they have to keep going back to start their data equation all over again. So we're trying to solve those problems by creating this separate resource. Again, we're very happy to be able to have that resource at Texas A&M. We really would feel better from a redundancy perspective to have capabilities, public capabilities on the island of Puerto Rico, and then have Texas A&M as our backup. But to your point, all of these things, we can design them, and that's what we want to do with this particular grant proposal. This proposal is for anywhere from $50 to $75 million is the reward, so to speak, for winning this hub designation. And so with that, then we would gather experts like you and others from around the island to say, where's the greatest need and how do we design this, not just for utilization today, but for optimal utilization for all of these future capabilities, technology capabilities that will keep the companies on the island of Puerto Rico competitive. So it's not about just looking at their competitive structure today, it's what's going to keep them competitive in 20 years.
And this is important because, guys, one other cost, I mean, I don't know how you handle it with Texas and A&M, but another issue with having your supercomputer beyond the sea is that not only you have to pay for the computing time, you have to pay for the telecom component. And it's not the same thing to come locally to a data center right here in Puerto Rico than to have to pay the fiber connection with a huge bandwidth so that you don't have to wait to transfer all your data all the way up to that data center in Texas. So that if you can eliminate that data transport cost, that can liberate a big chunk of your budget for computing time. You have to think of the numbers and the money. I mean, I know that sometimes some of my colleagues get offended because I'm so attuned to the business side of it, but the world moves around with money. And if you are not strategic and if you don't have the right resources locally, you have to waste a lot of money just trying to get it remotely.
That's exactly right. And I will say that the concept for the 5G zone was initiated by a group of venture capital partners on the island of Puerto Rico, because they were looking at how do we bring tools that will shorten the valley of death for new innovation in technology. And so this is how we were initially designed. And now we're iterating based on our new partners. And so again, this reach collaboration structure, we've got hundreds of expert partners on the island, nationally and globally. We really want to have the ideas pollinate together through the use of AI so that we can get more rapidly to the solutions through cross-disciplinary collaboration. And then we'll be able to create, because we've got this great team of partners, whatever challenge is surfaced through our activities, we'll be able to identify the right partners within that to do customized collaboration teams to solve some of the bigger challenges. One of the tools, and so I reordered my slides, and so I gave myself the wrong lead in on this particular slide. One of the things we're going to do in order to surface those challenges is through the Puerto Rico Manufacturers Association. Over the next year, we will have 6 roundtable discussions, one in each of the Puerto Rico Manufacturers Association's regions. They've divided the island into 6 regions, and we will ask them to identify in their own nomenclature. So again, they're business people, so speak about their challenges from a business level. We'll collect all of that information, and then we'll create through AI various tools for searching. So one of the tools will be searching through those challenges identified. And you may say, okay, it's just a list of problems. But we would say to innovators, no, that list of problems is a list of problems to solve and new products to create. And so we want to do that first. And then we will be able to go back, and as these products are developed, we'll be able to test them through the partners in the system. And then we'll be able to identify if those solutions don't solve the problems. We have this first tool that we're going to look at will help us to know what other solutions are out there, not just nationally, but globally, and where different solutions rank along that continuum. And then we'll be able to go back to, as we start gathering all of this data. And again, you can imagine this is a lot of information to manage, and we'll create searchable libraries of the solutions so that people can come in and easily identify if there's a webinar, for example, this webinar, and there's one section of this webinar that's really important, we'll have searchable capabilities to go in and look at that those specific sections that are related to the challenge, the solution, or the product.
I would like to suggest that you design these meetings for the near future, that you engage also with the Puerto Rico IT cluster and with IMCP, the Association of Microsoft Partners, and the same with AWS and Oracle, because they actually have the pulse on a lot of these. And some of these companies are doing, companies like Nagnoi, Wovenware, they're really doing advanced AI and data science computing, Invid as well. And
Yes.
it would be important to count them in, because industriales, which is the way we know them con cariño here in Puerto Rico, they do have some members that do a lot of that, but they're more involved in the actual manufacturer more than R&D. And
Right.
many of these companies in
So
IT do that.
No, absolutely. And so I was very purposeful. So one of my first role as the president of that committee, that chapter, was to identify the best subcommittee members. And you just named all of them. That we added more. So we were very purposeful of making it a diverse group and representing the various technology leaders on the island, including, for example, the SBDC Innovation Center, because again, that's a really important community to be able to engage as we're doing these solutions. So I totally agree. And Alberto is a part of our group, and Norberto Cruz and Dana Montenegro from Wovenware. So we've got a lot of people who are going to be giving those voices. And I think you're absolutely right. These kinds of solutions, and I think in economic development moving forward, because of technology, it's not going to be dependent on singular individuals or hierarchic structures. It's going to be very horizontally based. And AI really levels the playing field. And so you really have to have a diversity of voices as you come up with solutions.
Thank you.
And so from there, so TDP, this is the tool that I was talking about that will help us to identify. So let me just explain. This is a tool that was created in Silicon Valley. It's currently being used by Stanford University in their Global Engagement Center. And they have hundreds of millions of data sources that have been uploaded into their database, and they have over 100 algorithms that they've designed for sorting that data. And what they do is they take all of the data sources, and the types of data sources they have is they have all federal agency data sources, all public international innovation, product innovation, and technology databases. They have university abstracts from all over the world. They have new product spec sheets. All of this is uploaded into this database, and they can filter not just by keywords, but filter by entire sections of content describing products. And they can come up with a very simplified scorecard based on the desired criteria that is loaded in for sorting the data, and look at these products and how they rank against each other. And you can look at different criteria as you're doing this filtering. So for example, if you want to find a good AI tool that does a specific application, you can put it into this tool and you can say, I want to look at other companies that do this. I want to look at the time that their leadership has been engaged in this company. I want to look at the number of products this company has. I want to see how many success stories this company has with other products they've designed. And all of these things together then will be filtered into this simplified scorecard so that you can look at those other companies. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, actually reminds me a little bit of what Panoramica does with Dealroom. You know what they launched at the last B-Fest? They actually, Dealroom is a platform, it's a global platform, but they actually use AI and web crawling, and they analyze all the investors and all the companies, and they have actually created Panoramica is the Puerto Rico version. It's sponsored by InvestPR, and it actually creates, it helps entrepreneurs and investors for matchmaking. So you claim your profile for your company, you put it there, you talk about your rounds of investment and your inventions and whatnot. And then you say, hey, I need to make a round for $500,000. Who will be a good match for me? And then they will use a platform similar to this one, which is part of Dealroom. But it's basically the same thing, right? That it actually looks at all the different funds out there who are investing their history, and one good filter that they have is whether they have invested previously in Puerto Rico, right? Because I know some companies only invest in continental US or even within the US only in Silicon Valley or Texas, and that's it. And Georgia maybe, but nothing else exists because they are not Ivy League enough in the IT entrepreneur kingdom. So that kind of information is incredibly valuable.
Right. And this is where I actually have a meeting with Brian Borgery to talk about that, because I have a couple of
I had a
questions
meeting with him
on
last
that.
week. Yep.
Yes. And so, and when you're dealing with these kinds of data sources, so the way I understood that new tool is it's going to be that the different partners will enter their data, and then that's the database will match with a greater database. I believe it's somewhere like in Scandinavia is where the company that they've white labeled
Dealroom,
for that
yes.
product.
Dealroom.
And so I'm not sure where their data sources come from, and then who owns the data that goes in. And this is a good thing for your participants to really understand. These are really important questions. You know, who owns the data, and where are the data sources, and then how are they sorting the data in order
And
to
validating
come up
the
to
data.
and validating their conclusion. So that's
Mhm.
where this particular one, I know the answers to all of those questions. I was not aware that Invest Puerto Rico was working on that platform, and my hope is that we can merge these two.
It's launched. It's launched already.
Right,
Panoramica.
right. No, I know. I went to that event, and we've been partners with the decision platform for over a year. And so that's where I was surprised. I mean, I just want to figure out how they work together.
That's a topic for a good bottle of wine with Brian.
See. And so if this is a good, I think we're kind of running, actually, I'm surprised we're running short on time. I'm not going to click for this one. It's a presentation, but it's in this PowerPoint, and I provided it to you so everyone can look at it. But it's the founder of the Decision Platform, and he just speaks to the creation of the company and the why and what it does. And again, the thing that we're working on with them, we've done 4 different projects with them. The most recent one is they were engaged by the National Minority Business Agency, the federal agency, because after the Supreme Court decision that disallowed the utilization of race as an entrance criteria, there was a second federal case where the 8A program through the Small Business Administration was equally ordered to not continue to use race or minority status as part of their criteria for earning the special capabilities that 8A designation allows companies. It gives you special rates and special capabilities. What the agency has asked us to work on, using Puerto Rico as an example, is finding other keyword and criteria that would help to differentiate 8A companies without using race or minority status as one of the qualifiers. So it could be, for example, in Puerto Rico, and there's 147 companies that utilize 8A designations on the island of Puerto Rico. It could be that we would look at those 147 companies and say every one of those companies operates in a localized food desert, meaning that there's specific data that can point to the number of grocery stores that are available, or the types of food capabilities, or the cost of food within their region, and look at it from a very granular level in terms of geography, and determine if that is a factor or not a factor. So that's what we're working on them, is those types of products, and we want to use them so that, and this is why I talk about there's 3 different ways that this would be effective. So from a regional hub perspective, as we're trying to accelerate the process of commercializing new products, if an entity is developing a new product, you can put it in this tool and it will show you every other product in the world that is aligned to your product, and you can see how you rank based on the criteria that, for example, venture capital firms would look for. You can see where you're ranked, and you can see where your pitch is not as effective as some of the other products. Or you could look at it and you could sort it by geography and say, wow, this region of the world is really strong in other products that are similar to what I'm creating. So maybe I need to reach out and have a collaboration with entities within that region, because there might be an opportunity for us to work together. Or you could look at other products and say, wow, I'm starting to develop this product with these particular objectives in mind that the product is solving, but I'm just realizing as I'm looking at this tool that there's 1,000 other products that have that same capability, and I'm really low in my comparison to that. And so how can I tweak my product to make it so that it's unique and differentiated in a global marketplace?
So you can use this either for your own internal R&D, and you can also use it probably for a pre-patent application search to validate that you are not duplicating something that is already
Correct.
protected, right? And,
Correct.
and you need to
Or
subscribe
competing
to
with
this, to
something
do
that's
search.
that's or sorry, I'm sorry, or competing with something that even maybe isn't patent protected, but that they've already saturated the market, and you would have a hard time competing with this really established entity.
Right. So
Sorry.
to do searches here, you need to pay a regular subscription or a per search payment. How does it work?
Correct. And so we have a licensing fee that we as an organization have licensed the product so that we can use it. And part of our agreement is that they will help us design the algorithms specific to Puerto Rico. But what we want, because we want to have the capabilities always resident on the island of Puerto Rico. So we are working with a group of, it's actually 2 graduate students from UPR Mayagüez who have created a nonprofit company called Evolving Space. We are training them to become experts on this product. The Puerto Rico 5G zone will own the license, and they will be able to come in and use the product and help companies to navigate, based on high level analysis of what their needs are after we do all of these industry roundtable discussions and identify what the challenges are.
All right.
So we'll be able to, and the way we've structured it is we'll have 3 tiers. So businesses can either utilize this tool on their own. They can self-engage, and this is not just with this tool, but with all of our tools. They can have the nonprofit with student participation, do basically a very broad analysis. And then what we would envision is then there would be industry partners that are for-profit businesses that would then work with them to deploy those within their companies. So we're kind of have 3 different levels to kind of ease the companies into that, rather than just kind of throwing them off the deep end or requiring upfront a big investment where they don't really clearly understand. So it's kind of like a 3-legged stool for service development related to the complexity of all of these things.
Yeah, good, because sometimes these platforms are very expensive to subscribe to.
Yeah, yes. And so this is the second tool I wanted to talk about. It's called Matter Protocol. And this is a screenshot from their webpage. And again, the Matter Protocol at the top of the page is a link that you can link to that particular product. What they do is they do video search capabilities. So they will look at a video and they will aggregate hundreds, thousands of videos, millions of videos, and they will compare and tag the entire video based on keyword searches, so that you can look at the video, you can get an overview of the video, you can get a transcript of the video, you can go to a specific second within the video that talks about the topic that's related to what you're looking for. And they can customize these products internally within an individual company. So, for example, one of their clients, I believe, is Honeywell, and Honeywell has a lot of confidential internal documents that they create that it's to their benefit to be able to, you want the people within your organization to be able to search, but you don't want to put it on an external server where there's vulnerability of some of the documents that might be confidential in nature, and particularly where they're doing engagement with, say, the Department of Defense or some of the pharmaceutical companies on the island of Puerto Rico. This way they can create their own database of their own documents that can be searched. So it's like a customized Google within their own corporate entity. So it can either be within their facility or within their corporate entity. And they can do various solutions for trading, for sports analysis, for political analysis, and then those customized search capabilities.
So how does it
Well,
work? People need to rent this. I mean, they need to buy a license of the software they install in their own server and they feed it, or is it a cloud service?
It's fed through the company. So the
So it's a
company
cloud
is
service.
correct.
Okay. It's
So
interesting. Just to give you guys, you're listening to us way back in the 80s when I was a PhD student at UT Austin. I was hired by a professor who brought a research grant from University of California in Santa Barbara to do political speech analysis of news coverage of different candidates. And I had to create the methodology. And way back then, what we did is that we had recorded all the newscasts from the networks, and then I had to burn on the actual tape the time code of the program, and then I created the database that then the research assistants, they had to watch the whole newscast, and then they would enter a record anytime there was coverage of a presidential candidate. It started at 1 hour, 10 minutes, 44 seconds, and it ended at 1 hour, 18 minutes, and 10 seconds. And then my database will calculate how long was the segment, and then they will have to write a summary of what it covered. And we had like 10 research assistants doing that. And after using my database and the burning of the time code that we did in a post-production house. So all of that was analog work that now you don't need to do any of that crap because the system will automatically transcribe all the speech to text, and it will also look at the images. So it may identify how many times a flag of Trump won for 2020 appears, like all those crazies, right? So, I mean, now you can do that in seconds with thousands upon thousands of video hours, as opposed to the hundreds of hours that it took my researchers to do that way back in the 80s. I just wanted to share that because
That
I
is a
started
great
smiling when I saw
story.
that.
I love that. That is a great story. And so what we want to use this for example, is we actually have 3 products that we want to look at. The first would be a searchable database specifically around the products and new products and innovation. Well, first we would do one around challenges. Then we would do one around solutions. And then the third one would be around customized training. And so one of the things that has occurred to me, and again, as a layperson, I'm not a technologist, I'm an economic developer, and I serve industry. And one of the things I see frequently is that people don't know, companies don't know what to do with all of the data that they collect. They don't know just even their internal data, but they really don't understand what to do with all the external sources of information. And I will give as an example, training. You can go for training and certifications through AWS. You can go and get LinkedIn Learning. You can go to Apple, to Google, to all of these different entities have training programs, and I have gone through them and trying to navigate which one is the right one or which one is attached to specific enabling technologies that are needed in the sector is really challenging. And so to be able to have this kind of a database to say, here's your challenges, here are the skills related to those here's your challenges, here's your solutions, here are the skills related to their challenges, and here's the resources readily and easily available in seconds that can train your people on that skill set.
Amazing.
And then the third thing I wanted to point out, and this is called, and you may be familiar with this, the Opportunity Project, which is, so from a federal perspective, the federal agency that really is focused on collecting and utilizing data and making it available for the good of all of the citizens of the United States is the Census Bureau. And they have an initiative to use the data, use government data to build digital tools with, by, and for the people. And so that's why I did the screenshot of that particular entity. I'm working right now with the Economic Development Administration through the Opportunity Project, so it's called TOP, to work with tribal entities in the US and isolate the barriers to capital access that they have, and then look at new products and how that can help them. So one of the reasons why tribal entities in the US have a challenge is because the underwriting that banks perform disfavor, because of their algorithms, favor sometimes, for example, the sovereignty status of a tribal entity as opposed to a US based entity, because a lot of tribal entities are considered their own sovereign country. So what we'll be able to do is, my role in that will be to look at the products that are emerging out of these opportunity project sprints, where they'll say the problem is capital availability in tribal nations. We will aggregate innovators from all over the country to submit solutions that will help to solve that problem. I will then be one of the advisors to those product developers on how to commercialize their product and engage as many tribes as possible with the products that have the highest rating in terms of delivering the solution that actually solves the problem that we identified.
That's a wonderful project. Actually, I attended the orientation webinar for TOPS this term, and I remember listening to the presentation for these tribal communities. I'm going to be participating, but not in that one. I am involved with the financing for innovation and technology transfer in Puerto Rico. That one is being sponsored by NVDA and the Trust, the Puerto Rico Science and Technology Trust, because I have a project that I want to document all the knowledge nodes in Puerto Rico. And actually, I'm bringing two of my former students from the information science program to join me in the effort. And this is, guys, you don't know the opportunity project. By the way, it's a brainchild of a Puerto Rican who is a leader at the census. Her name is Lorena Molina, and she's part of the White House special working group for Puerto Rico. And she is right now in between the U.S. Census and Department of Commerce leading the Opportunity Project. This is basically like a 3-month-old hackathon in which you have these problem statements that have been approved. Gail mentioned one, I mentioned the other. There are 4 altogether, all centered around, well, 3 of them are centered in Puerto Rico. The other one was more for the tribal organizations. And the idea is that tech teams and user advocates and product designers all come together. They look at the problem, they look at the potential data sources they can explore from all over the federal government. Then they propose a prototype. And the only bad thing is that this is not an STTR or SBIR. They are not giving you money for development. You have to put in the time and you have to put in your own money to develop the prototype. But I'm hoping, that's why I'm hoping I'm going to invest 3 months of my life in this, that you at least you validate your stakeholders' assumptions, and you also make contact with a network of potential customers who are the stakeholder advocates. So at the end of it, if they like your prototype, they may knock on your door and say, hey, I'm willing to invest on that or buy your solution. Just so you know a little bit more about the Opportunity Project, look it up, US Census Top, and you might be interested in joining one of those. If not this term, they're starting this week, the next time. They're done, I think, every year or twice a year.
And that's amazing. And exactly, I'm so excited to hear that you're part of that. And actually, we want to connect. We've already made the introductions. We want to start utilizing the TDP tool to start looking at, because one of the challenges, to your exact point, is that they're developing these great networks, but they haven't really figured out what happens then to the companies. And so that's what we're trying to use. We'd love to use that tool to be able to identify logical pathways forward based on global market analysis or regional market analysis. So the TDP tool doesn't only look at markets from a global level. It could be that what you've designed has a very niche market, and we can uncover that through a data sort.
Well, hurry back to Puerto Rico. We'll do lunch and show you my project, and you tell me what I can do with it.
I love it. I love it. And so now we've talked about how we're designing this system of labs that really leverages the industry and the sector strengths on the island of Puerto Rico. We want those labs to be highly enabled with the best quality tools that are out there from a data management perspective. And then we're looking at linking those labs, and we've already established, as you know, with Texas A&M, for example, we've established relationships. We've established a relationship with Purdue, and they have a similar in Indiana 5G zone. The Pacific Northwest Lab, which is the federal laboratory specifically dedicated to cybersecurity research and development. And then this kind of first one after the Puerto Rico labs is there is a new lab being designed at National Landing in Washington, D.C. It's going to be, the sponsor of that lab is Capgemini, which is a global
Consulting.
Thank you, consulting firm, like 400,000 global employees. Their specialty is in environmental and ESG research and development. And so we are linking our lab system to their lab system. Through that lab, then we'll be linked to labs in Montreal, Silicon Valley, and India. Wow. And it's part of our goal, again, to use Puerto Rico as the development zone for those mudroom applications. And remember, mudrooms are the thing that you design, and they're called mudrooms because they're kind of ugly. It's not a pretty product. It's a product that's designed to interface to technologies that might not be otherwise compatible or compatible from a cybersecurity perspective. And then through all of this, as I've said, there's got to be responsive training. And so we're working with training partners throughout the island. And Elliot, this is why I'm so glad that we're connected, because this is certainly an area where you're going to be critical. And I will say, for example, there are places, we have some that on the island, things that we would call fab labs. Or innovation application labs, maker spaces. Those are all terms. We visited, when we had the University of Michigan students here, we visited one, and the gentleman who was the chip designer for GM came over to me and said, "Come here, I want to show you something." And we walked over and looked at a piece of equipment that was in this lab, and we toured labs and facilities all over the island. And he said, "You see this piece of equipment right here?" He said, "I use this every day in my work designing chips." And he said, "But I will tell you, I asked how long this piece of equipment here, and the answer was 2 years. And I will tell you, no one's ever used this piece of equipment because I recognize the factory settings on the monitor, and I recognize this particular piece right here. It has no wear on it, and that would be worn if it was, in operation." So these kinds of challenges, I'm telling you, this facility is state of the art. But if somebody doesn't know how to utilize that piece of equipment for simulation modeling, then we need to solve that. And we need to solve that by teaching them how to use that piece of equipment. And that's a pretty simple thing.
Or providing the specialized service for people who are really good at it to analyze it for them, which is another form of doing it.
Exactly. So again, this is our envision result. This is an economic development project. The premise is that technology, innovation, and new products, services, and applications grow specifically from problems that need to be solved. So it's not its own, you're not creating an independent product, you're creating solutions through technology. And we believe that technology is advancing more rapidly than businesses can keep pace. And so good economic development requires that regions assist business in navigating complex technical solutions. And we understand that business and technology partners speak different languages. And so through using the unique nomenclature for both parts of that equation and finding the right translational tools using AI, we can accelerate economic opportunity on the island of Puerto Rico. These last 4 slides are very specific to this grant proposal that we put in. So because it's a phase 1 and a phase 2. Phase 1 of this particular project is defining the partners that will work together to deploy funding for phase 2. And so in here, we've identified the various activities that we're going to do over the next year during our phase 1 that will then lead us to the conclusions in for our application for phase 2 on how we would spend the 50 to 75 million. And so we've got kind of, a basic dollar amounts behind those activities that we would plan. And then we've already, because we know that it's really the purpose of phase 2 that all of this work is being done. And so we felt like it was really important to say, here are the investments we think are critically important for phase 2 that we'll be talking about, defining, determining through phase 1, so that we know that when we get to phase 2 and our application, everything we're doing is specific to the needs of our collective network and our users.
All right.
And so then there's a basic budget. There's not really budget thoughts, but these are the types of things that would be invested through that.
So are you guys operational right now? Where are you right now?
So we have submitted this proposal. We are starting in November. We're going to be starting the roadshow activities. We're actually engaging University of Michigan graduate students again. I would love to work with a group of your students also on some of the development of this. We've engaged, as I said, TDP and Matter Protocol, the top initiative, and we're going to then be aggregating those things all together. So we are ready to go.
Let's see how we can collaborate with you. And now I know we are supposed to finish at 7:30. I know that this conversation has been very rich, but also very high level and somewhat technical and maybe intimidating for some of our participants. But I would like to open the floor for any of you interested in asking questions or making comments. It doesn't matter if you are technical or not. You can just ask, what does it mean for Puerto Rico or whatnot? I loved it, but I'm living in this environment every day, and we have many things in common with Gail here, and also with Geraldo. And next week, my students are going to have the privilege to visit Hub 787. It's almost as difficult to get there as into the Pentagon. It takes a while with all the security measures, but that's what you get with a layer 3 or tier 3 computing facility. Okay, so I think people want to get to dinner. I won't keep them. Gail, Geraldo, this has been amazing. I really enjoyed that. Gail, I congratulate you for bringing this initiative to Puerto Rico, bringing all that expertise. I didn't read your whole bio because we didn't have enough time, but you did a lot of stuff in the US and you decided to relocate here to Puerto Rico to help us move in this next direction. And you just opened something for me, because I am in the Puerto Rico Sustainable Development Council as well. I am the head of the advanced infrastructure, and that includes telecommunications. But I need to admit that as I was working with my group this week, we had 2 meetings, and we were creating objectives. I failed to bring up the need to have our own high-level, high-powered data centers so that we can be self-reliant, even if a big tsunami destroys the underwater cable. So I'm going to take it as to do for myself to add that, discuss that with my team, and add it as one of the strategies that we need to foster, that 787 not only grows, but that it expands quite a bit more and becomes the center for resilient telecom and data processing on the island.
Yes,
Okay.
and there's 2 things. Number one,
Mhm.
we actually have a company, 1,500 employees, that wants to move to Puerto Rico, but that's what they need. They're currently in Austin. They use the Texas Advanced Computing Center. So we need to build something that has that same capability. And we have a second company, and this might be a whole other topic, but Laser Light Communications, which will be setting up a redundant space to ground optic network that is whether it'll have 2 ground stations, optic ground stations in Puerto Rico. It'll have another 20 optic ground stations throughout the Caribbean basin, and they'll all run off of AI-enabled weather data. So they get weather data updated every 5 minutes, and they'll select automatically which of those ground stations has the best coverage. And if it goes below 98% coverage from the laser, which is light and intolerant to clouds, it'll switch to ground cable.
Amazing.
So that'll be huge. It'll be the first place in the US for that kind of capability.
And again, thank you for my speakers. Thank you to all of you who attended and stayed with us all this time. Thank you so much. Good evening to all of you. Take care and see you in our next webinar on this AI series.